Hello and welcome to Upside Daily. I trust that you are ready to turn your world upside down again today. Now remember, this daily podcast empowers you to live from grace, to find your purpose in life, and to challenge you to deep personal and spiritual growth. My hope is really that you would be empowered in your calling as a city changer to be able to live with faith, love, and hope. And this is episode 2 of our new series called Doubt, Lack, and Fear, the 3 things God did not give you. And in today's episode, we're going to look at we are not to receive this. Now, in this first week of this series, I want to focus on the concept of doubt. Research shows us that 2 out of every 3 Christians admit to experiencing a season of spiritual doubt. More than a quarter of Christ followers still find themselves doubting today. And the most common response to spiritual doubt, people quit church, they give up. Now, can I just ask you to imagine for a moment, if you can think of your church's entire congregation, or let's change that, maybe perhaps just at your family for a moment. Research shows that 1 out of every 4 people is struggling with spiritual doubt right now. Now, I recognize when we journey through our doubt, it becomes a necessary part of almost every faith journey, but at the same time, it can be crippling. Can you consider that almost half of the people in your family experience spiritual doubt right now and could perhaps respond by quitting church altogether? If we put that into view, we recognize that this is an incredibly important word. And so for the start of today's episode, I want to take you to our key scripture for the week, Romans 8, verse 15. It says, "For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear." Just listen to this. You did not receive. God did not give this to you. He did not give you this spirit of slavery that you might fall back into fear, but you have received. He has given you, says Romans 8:15, the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. And here we have this. You did not receive, but we have received something else. And remember the premise that we spoke of yesterday in yesterday's episode. The premise is, how well can we receive? Because we did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but we have received the spirit of adoption as sons of God, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. Paul contrasts this idea of slavery and fear to sonship. I believe the reason why Paul highlights this to us is because it's possible. It's possible, even through the victory of Christ on the cross, even though it was an undeniable success, because we allow thought patterns and lifestyle and worldview to govern our lives, we end up living with doubt, and we lose out on the very inheritance that Christ empowered and secured for us on the cross, secured for you on the cross. And we end up living like paupers and slaves when really we ought to be enjoying the inheritance. Remember, as I said in yesterday's episode, we end up spending our time trying to achieve something when really we should be spending our time rejoicing. Now, the New Testament challenges our thinking in regards to our relationship with the Father. And the scripture speaks about children and sons, but it goes deeper and further than just the mentality of a slave and a son. The Bible speaks so clearly about these children and sons, and there is a difference. If you start thinking about a son versus a slave, it contrasts this sonship with being an orphan. And we find ourselves in this position where a slave is somebody who has to fight for their own provision, they have to fight for their own security, and have to fight for their own sustenance. But in Scripture, we read this idea that a child who is not a slave is something different from a son. And now what Paul says to us in Romans 8, he says, listen, you have not received a spirit of slavery, but you have received as a son of God, this spirit of adoption. And that's why I believe it's necessary for us to unpack not just the difference between a slave and a son, but it's also necessary for us to unpack something of the difference between a child and a son. And we see the difference very graphically portrayed for us in Galatians chapter 4, verse 1 to 7, where Paul the apostle writes these words. He says, "What I am saying to you is that as long as an heir is underage, a child," the Greek word here is nepios, and I love that word because it reminds me of a nappy. Okay, so as long as a child is underage, says Paul, he's no different from a slave, although he owns the whole estate. You see, a slave owns nothing, but a child owns the whole estate. But when a child is still underage, there is no difference between the child and the slave. There is something that, whilst the child owns the whole estate, now verse 2 says the heir is still subject to guardians and trustees until the time set by his father. So also when we were underage, says Paul, we were in slavery under the elemental spiritual forces of the world. But when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive the adoption to sonship. And the Greek word here is huios, which means of legal age. And then in verse 6 it says, because you are his sons, because you are his huios, no longer nepios, no longer underaged legal heirs, but you're underage, you cannot work with the inheritance. He says, now you are a son. God sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son, says verse 7. And if a son, God has also made you an heir. Oh, listen, if we could just start to understand and grasp that God did not give us this spirit of slavery, that we would feel, as if we don't own anything, as if we have no authority in any situation, as if there is no inheritance in any situation, as if there is no legal standing or a family name that is unpacked to our lives. There's something that we're missing out on. As a matter of fact, there's so much that we're missing out on, because what God has designed for your life is to go beyond the slave and not just understand that you're a child of God, but actually move into an area of sonship. And because of our sonship, we enjoy certain things in relationship to God. The first thing is security. We are not to fear or doubt, but enjoy sonship. An employee or a servant basically obeys out of fear for punishment or the loss of the job. But a child, a son relationship is not characterized by fear of losing that relationship. It cannot be terminated. The second thing that we get access to is authority. We have not the status, not of a slave, but of a son in a house. Slaves have no authority. They can only do what they're told. But under the parents, children do have authority in the house. They are not mere servants. They have the honor of the family name. And there's this wonderful status that has been conferred to them. The third thing that we enjoy is intimacy. The term Abba was an Aramaic term which best be translated daddy. If I think about my own sons, I am their father, but they don't ever call me father. There's always a term of endearment, and that's what the term Abba means. We have this sense of intimacy with our Father. The fourth thing that we enjoy is assurance, because the Spirit of God testifies with our spirit that we are his children. There's this inner witness that we are. And lastly, inheritance. We access the same inheritance as Jesus does. In James 1 verse 6, in the Mirror translation, I read these words, your requests give voice to faith. Faith is the stabilizing factor. Otherwise, you become driven by emotions, inconsistent judgments that get out of control like rough winds or rough seas tossed by tempest winds. See, slavery is such a poor substitute for sonship. As a matter of fact, they're opposites. The one leads forcefully through fear, while sonship responds fondly to the Father, Abba, Father. Can I say to you again, we did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but we did receive the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. That's all we have time for today in this podcast. But my prayer is that perhaps you would take a moment and just consider the implication of these 5 things over your personal life. How does it implicate on you? How do you think about this? What happens in your own life? How do you respond to that which God has not given you and start receiving well the things that He has? Can I invite you, if you want to dive in deeper or connect with us, you can check out the links in the description of today's episode. There are some links to our website or perhaps to DoxaDeo.Church, a great place to dive in deeper into this word. Tomorrow, I want to speak to you about it's time to take Him at His word. It's going to be another brilliant episode as we unpack doubt, lack, and fear, the 3 things God did not give us in our lives. Perhaps you're struggling with doubt as you listen to this word. I trust that something is ignited in your spiritual journey. May you live blessed.